Today I'm giving you a full review of Puma's Deviate Nitro Elite 2. Let's get into it. Now my friends, pretty happy to tell you about this shoe, and I've been pretty excited waiting for it to come out. Now Puma has made a lot of changes between this shoe, V2 and V1, and V1 was wildly popular, and I know a lot of you have been looking forward to this shoe. Let's get started with price. Puma has raised the price just a little bit this year over V1 when that was first released. The Deviate Nitro Elite 2 is going to retail for $220, and it's a shame that I have to say it, but $220 is actually a pretty competitive price point. Now the Deviate Nitro Elite 2 is Puma's top of the line race shoe, but as we go on and we talk about ride, I'm going to be giving you my thoughts on what this shoe is best suited for. And I have put the shoe through all the runs. I've run easy, I've run fast, I've done intervals, I've done tempo runs, and you may be surprised at what I think this shoe is actually going to work best for. Now, just like the Deviate Nitro Elite, the Deviate Nitro Elite 2 has 36mm in the heel, 28mm in the forefoot for an 8mm drop. Do like an 8mm drop, especially when it comes to a race shoe. Actually, a lot of shoes. It's just a comfortable drop for me. Now, version 2 here has put on just a little bit of weight over version 1, but it isn't something that I actually notice when they're on my feet. However, when I do hold version 1 and version 2 together, I can feel that the version 1 is quite a bit lighter. But we are talking about the version 2. I'll reach back down there when I want to make some comparisons. But in the US men's size 9, the Deviate Nitro Elite 2 tips the scale at 7.6 ounces or 215 grams. However, in my size, a US men's size 13, it tips the scale at 9.5 ounces or 270 grams. That's about an ounce or 33 grams heavier than version 1. Now, look, I know a lot of you are very focused on weight, and I am too, to a certain point. But let me just reiterate that the slightly heavier weight of version 2 was not noticeable on my feet, and enough changes have been made where overall it's a more solid shoe. So with that, let's start at the top. Let's work our way down. Now just take a look at this heel collar right here. Now we have a very thin piece of material, although it's not as thin as version 1. Puma has made it a little more substantial, and then we have this little padded bolster that runs around the side of the heel collar, all the way around the back, and then around the other side. In version 1, we only had two little pads, one on the lateral side and then again on the medial side, and then in version 2 we have this pad that comes all the way around the back, which creates a nice comfortable fit. Now the Elite 2 does actually have a heel counter incorporated. Version 1 didn't. So while it's not totally rigid, it does give a little structure, and this structure again just contributes to a much better fit, at least for me, over version 1. The Elite 2 is much more of a traditional shoe feeling, if that makes any sense. And even though that I didn't have any heel slip in version 1, I know a lot of you did, and I think for those of you that do experience some heel slip in shoes that don't really have a heel counter, I think the Elite 2 is going to be a much better option for you. Again, I didn't have any heel slip in version 2 and I found it to be super comfortable. The upper is something that Puma has totally redone, and on the Elite 2 we are using an engineered mesh upper, a little more traditional, especially when it's compared against the version 1. I actually think this is a lot more comfortable when I put my foot into it and has a nice tactile feel when I'm touching it. While we're talking about the upper, let me just show you the toe box on version 2, and let me pull out version 1 and show you this. I'm going to put them right up next to each other, and you can see that version 1 is quite a bit thinner in the toe box than version 2. Now, I think I have quite narrow feet, so I didn't find version 1 to be too narrow, but if you're someone that doesn't have narrow feet, I think you're going to find version 2 just fits a little more comfortable, gives your feet a little more room in the toe box. Version 2 does have a little more substantial and more traditional feel than version 1. And again, that is because of the change in the upper, the incorporation of a heel counter. We do have some overlays running down the eyelet chain just to give it a little more support, and then on the inside we have power tape, and I think you can probably see it best here on the medial side. It's actually labeled power tape, and we can see that half moon, and that's just giving the upper a little more support. So when your foot goes into the shoe upper kind of hugs around your foot. We've also got a light overlay right around the toes, just giving a little more structure and support. And this means absolutely nothing, but I do love this slightly enlarged Puma right across the front of your foot. I just think that looks really sharp. Anyway, moving on to something that actually means something to you, and that's the tongue. The tongue has been vastly improved. On version 1, the tongue wasn't attached at all. On version 2, we have a nice, very thin kind of race day tongue, but we do have two lace loops, one on each side. And when the laces are threaded through those lace loops, the tongue isn't going anywhere. I know that a lot of complaints of version 1 was that the tongue would often slip to the side after you've been out for a run. And in all the miles that I put into version 2, I haven't found that to be the case at all. Once this shoe is locked in, it's a very comfortable ride. The tongue isn't going anywhere. Let's drop down a little further to the real magic of the shoe, the midsole. And Puma is using Nitro Elite, which is their nitrogen-infused PUMA foam. And if you look at it from the side, you can see that the foam is kind of split, and right in between that foam is a totally redesigned carbon fiber plate. Now, I can't say too much about the carbon fiber plate because I haven't taken the shoes apart to actually look at it, but according to PUMA, the plate has been redesigned to provide a more efficient ride and toe off. And I can't say anything against that. I agree. The shoe feels really good. Let's just come down to the outsole for a second. In fact, before we talk about the outsole, let's continue with the carbon fiber plate because there is a little cutout right here on the bottom and we can see PUMA's power plate. Got this full coverage rubber right on the front, and we got these two strategically placed pieces right on the back. PUMA is using PUMA Grip for the Deviate Elite Nitro 2 as opposed to PUMA Grip LT on version 1. And I don't think there's anything negative I can say about this outsole rubber. I love the amount of coverage that we get. The grip is absolutely superb, and it looks like it's standing up to a lot. Now, before I've made this review, I've put about 45 miles in this shoe. I am not seeing too much wear on the outsole rubber. I'm seeing a little bit of scuffing on the midsole right here, and that's just from when I'm running super slow. I tend to heel strike a bit more, but the rubber is holding up remarkably well. Okay, so that is what makes up the Deviate Elite Nitro 2. The shoe is remarkably comfortable, but let's talk about ride. Now, it does have a nitrogen-infused PUMA-based midsole, and like other PUMA foams, sometimes I get that feeling or that sound that I'm stepping on an empty juice box when I'm running in shoes with a PUMA foam. I do get that slightly in the Deviate Elite 2. Oh, and by the way, I don't mean that as a negative. That's just what I associate the sound of running in these types of shoes with. And the Elite 2 is overall a very quick and extremely comfortable shoe at all paces. And I do mean all paces. Now, when I get this shoe up to speed, it does feel very light on my foot. The turnover is good. The transitions are nice and smooth. But when I get up to running really fast, at least fast for me, the Elite 2 doesn't have that same feeling of forward propulsion that other super shoes do. And by other super shoes, I'm thinking of the Metaspeed Sky Plus, the Endo Pro 3, the Next Percent 2. For me, those shoes kind of feel like they are moving me forward, kind of propelling me forward just as I start to toe off. I don't have that same feeling in the Elite 2. And I'm not a scientist, I haven't tested these shoes in the lab, but it seems to me that the carbon plate in the Elite 2 might not be as stiff as some other marathon race day shoes. So the ride on the Elite 2 is a little more, I don't know, I'd say maybe comfortable, and I only use the word comfortable to describe it as a comparison to other carbon plated race shoes, because compared with some of the competitors, the carbon fiber plate is not as noticeable. And because it's not as noticeable, I don't experience any plate fatigue. I don't get that tiring feeling of running on a plated shoe for hours at a time. And for that same reason of maybe a less rigid plate, the Elite 2 handles itself remarkably well at all speeds. So for me, that comes in the form of running a warm-up before I do my workout. I'll usually run for a couple miles to get warmed up, then I'll do whatever workout I have planned for the day, whether that's intervals or a tempo run, and then I'll run a couple miles to cool down at the end. The Elite 2 feels just as good when I'm warming up and cooling down as it does when I'm on the intervals. Now remember, we've got 36 in the heel, 28 in the forefoot. That's a pretty good amount of cushioning, and I found it to be very supportive underfoot. And although I didn't test this shoe up to the marathon distance, I would have no problem putting this shoe on my foot and having it support me and actually feel good throughout a long run. By long run, I'm thinking 3 to 4 hours. But I actually think this shoe will excel at shorter distances. And by shorter, I'm saying that the Elite 2, at least in my opinion, is going to be far better at running a half marathon than a full marathon. At least for me. That's how I plan to use this shoe moving forward. Even shorter distances, the 5K and the 10K, absolutely, though I don't find myself running too many of those distances. This would definitely be a shoe that I lean towards and grab for a half marathon. But for me at least, I do enjoy that feeling of being propelled forward when I'm running a full marathon. And that feeling of propulsion is really appreciated by me when I'm getting tired towards the end of the race. So let me just reiterate that the Deviate Elite 2 is most certainly a marathon race day shoe. And by that I mean it can stand up to the distance, it's going to protect your body from the constant pounding for several hours at a time. The shoe is light, it's very responsive, but at least for me, I like a little more of that forward propulsion feeling that we get in some of the, well, ultimately, far more expensive shoes than this. But I gotta say that not everyone likes that feeling. If you like a more traditional feel in a race shoe, the Deviate Elite 2 is going to fit that bill, but also you get a lot more protection in the Deviate Elite 2 than you do in those traditional race shoes. So it's probably a win-win. All in all, I think the Deviate Elite 2 is a very solid update over the Elite 1. I really enjoy what PUMA has done with the entire fit of the shoe. The fit, the feeling, the comfort is actually far superior to version 1. And PUMA has done a pretty good job bringing it to life in this shoe. Hey, if you have made it to this point in the video, first of all, thank you very much. Second of all, why don't you put the cat emoji in the comments just so I know that you made it all the way to the end. My name is Matt B. Be kind, be happy, run well. See you in a couple of days.